Almost ready. Hello. What kind of Q&A is this? This is kind of the Q&A will be really kind of however you shape it. My plan is to talk about creativity and faith, and because those are the spaces I function in, and then wherever else you decide to take it from there. Hi, Justin from Kansas City. Hey, Charlie. Bagley, waiting for folks to gather up here. Yeah, we'll make this kind of whatever we want. What's the subject? Tim, again, what I'm planning on doing is mostly around creativity and faith, because, again, that's where I hang out. And then outside of that, wherever you want to roll, politics, etc., we can do that. I was watching something else, and Facebook told me you were live. What sorcery is this? Carl, I don't know. I'm not sure it's sorcery. It might be science. I think we've historically had a hard time discerning the two of that. Dan Portner from SoCal, coming on in. Sarah, Sarah's coming from the East Coast. Jennifer Law, the brilliant and wonderful Jennifer Law. Are you on an airplane right now, Jennifer? You're on United Airlines. I love that. Awesome. Oh yeah, Calgary. We got folks from Calgary, Alberta. We're international at this point. So I'm gonna wait a couple more moments. If you've got questions, how much better to? Well, so if you've got questions, go ahead and ping them down here. Do your best, and I'll try to catch them as I go along. I've got a short list of questions that came in ahead of time, and we're gonna do this regularly. So don't worry that you're gonna get missed. Eventually, we'll get to one of your questions. So yes, awesome. Hello, Aaron. Glad you're here. Super glad you're here. Eric So is here. Fantastic. I like Eric So. Randy Borowski. Randy, are you still in South Carolina? I'm hoping that's the case. Well, good guy right there, Randy Borowski. Yeah, see the comic book questions for messaging. Okay, we can do that. Nick, what's up, man? Hey, why don't I dive in real quick with a few questions, and I've got some announcements towards the tail end. Morgan, I promise I'll come around to that question as well. I like some folks, some old friends meeting here on the old chat. Actually, I'll start right there with one that came in before I dive in. Oh, glad, Randy, you're still in South Carolina. Fantastic. Hey, so Charlie Bagley's asking about a friend of mine named Dylan Mortimer, who's an artist that you may know from his part in the CMYK project. He did the artwork, and we did an interview with him for the M portion of the CMYK project, and part of Dylan's story is living with cystic fibrosis, and Dylan had a lung transplant just this past week, and he's doing really, really well. So if you've been someone who's been tracking with him and paying attention and praying for him and loving on his family in some way, shape, or form, keep it up. He's in a good place. He's got great spirits. If you check, kind of scroll down on my page, there's a little bit of an update from him and a picture of him taking a long walk in the hospital. Really excited. Nelson Singleton, bring back the beard. Well, we'll see what happens. It kind of comes and goes. The beard comes and goes. I think you probably still have yours, Nelson. So I may join you. I usually pick it up during the winter, and it just didn't. It really didn't feel right. So here's some of the questions that came in. A few of these are sort of the kind of a combination of faith and creativity. And so the first one I want to get to is Scott asks, what happened in the Christian music industry? Yeah, that's a big question, right? That drove so many away or caused rifts about artists not being able to express themselves. this is one of those questions that has there are probably 100 different angles on this, and it kind of depends, and how you see it obviously depends on what your role was. What I'll do, I'll tell you what Scott, I'll tell you what my observation is, and it's sort of threefold. The first one was, I don't know, in mid 90s or so, I think there really was like culturally a pretty legitimate desire among people of faith for a really specific kind of musical expression, artistic expression. Like, music has always been important for Protestant churches and congregations, and so doing that well became more and more important. The technology got better, and players got better, I guess, to some degree, and so the ability for bands to make better church music like filled that need for a while. So I think some of it started there, but then the thing that ends up happening with, and this is not just Christian cultures, this is culture in general, we commodify good things. So if it meets a need, it's oftentimes not enough that it meets a need. We want to take that need that it meets and then create a product that we can then sell to people. So we don't want to just meet needs, which is more of like from a Christian standpoint, kind of a ministry and charity and generosity thing. We productize it, which is more of kind of a capitalistic monetizing type thing. So what I think happened is folks really wanted this particular expression of art, this really high quality church music thing. And then people who like to make money on art, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that, recognize that there was a lot of money to be made in that particular expression. So then you started seeing bands who had never really made church music before start making church music almost exclusively, because they were following the money. So that's the first thing. I think there was a real desire, and then the industry kind of grabbed a hold of that desire and created a product to meet that need. So it's just kind of basic kind of demand kind of cycle. The second part of it was, I think, and this is the way I wrote it down, I said listeners have grown to see and hear God in more and various places. So one of the things that happened with regards to like artists not wanting to participate in what they call the Christian music anymore, is Christian music industry or scene, is it like listeners kind of, hey Sonny, good to see you. Listeners just didn't feel the need to have that like narrowly curated space. So I'm more comfortable listening to the world around me and paying attention and looking for the divine in these nooks and crannies. Again, the way I wrote about it in the CMYK project was, the people seeing God in more and various places, rather than just in this like one space, like 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. That I think there is also a cultural growth in which we are more comfortable seeing and listening for God in places that weren't narrowly curated as like, hey, here's where God's going to show up. Here's a place where religious things happen. And the third part of that is sort of attached to the second part, is with Facebook and Twitter, with like as technology grew, as when's the last time you were the fifth wheel? I'll get to that, Rich. Everyone brings up fifth wheel. We'll stop that at some point. But I think artists with the expanse and the implementation of better technology, we don't need gatekeepers the way we used to in order to have a relationship with our audience. And so without those gatekeepers, some of those gatekeepers had big Christian t-shirts on, and in order to get through that gate, there was a really particular kind of expression that you needed to have, and this was defined as religious music or Christian music. You had to go through that gate. We don't really need that so much anymore. I can do this. I'm literally sitting in my office upstairs in my house, and I'm in contact with you, and no one had to set this up for me. Like I got to set this up for myself. So those three things. The one was, I think the market took advantage of a real need in people. I think musicians then, musicians also got recognized that they didn't need the gatekeeper, and then I think listeners are just more comfortable listening to stuff that doesn't have the label on it. Sean Wolf, what sort of tradition were you raised in, and how do you think that affects your creativity? Actually, interesting, Sean, that actually pairs with a question I got from Gail as well about faith, my faith in my creativity. And what Gail asks is how does faith impact your creativity? I actually wasn't raised in a religious tradition per se. My mother grew up Catholic, is still a faithful Catholic, an incredible woman, and celebrates her faith as a Catholic. It was sort of in the air, but it was never religion. Faith wasn't like taught in my household. It wasn't like a practiced element. And so when I started following Jesus, when I became a Christian, it was in the context of Young Life. And the way I guess that informed my creativity, the core of Young Life is this philosophy that you earn the right to be heard, and B, this sort of what they call this incarnational idea that you meet people where they're at. So you earn the right to be heard, and you meet people where they're at. Those two things actually continue to guide my creative process and the way I express myself and live as an artist. Earning the right to be heard. From one project to the next, I always feel like I'm kind of reapplying for the same job. So I've never felt like, hey, the last project was great so I can rest on my laurels. I've always felt like every time I'm going to put something together, I'm applying for the job again to be a voice in your life. The meeting people where they're at, the idea that incarnation. This is probably the best example of how my faith tradition, which is Young Life, has informed my creative process. I really couldn't stand the idea of Spotify and free music for the longest time. I was like a little bit of a curmudgeon about it. I liked people buying music and more people going to a place where like you can get it all for free. And then I recognized, like, man, that's where people are. Folks are at Spotify, and if I want to connect with people, I need to be where people are, and they're hanging out at Spotify. So when I did Young Life, I don't eat Taco Bell. I hate Taco Bell, but the kids I wanted to hang out with were hanging out at Taco Bell, so I would go to Taco Bell. And that's deeply informed the way I practice my life as an artist. I'm gonna do my best to meet people where they are, as opposed to saying, "Hey, I'm gonna be over here. Come meet me." So, Young Life as a religious tradition, in a way, has informed me in terms of like I'm always reapplying for the job. I'm always earning the right to be heard, and I'm always trying to meet you where you are instead of asking you to come find me. Nikki asks, "What are things or ways a community can?" or maybe should do to support artists? Sheesh. I guess sort of depends on the community. There are a million ways to support artists. The one thing is, if there's an artist you believe in, here, this is maybe too obvious to say, but if there's an artist you believe in and she's creating work, share it with people who don't know about her work yet, and pay for it if you have the opportunity. There's this odd kind of connection here. Like I love my close-knit community. I love the people that I practice life with. And if I'm making something, I want people to have it. At the same time, I really do appreciate it when the folks around me are actually willing to like move past my sometimes unwise generosity and actually just go ahead and pay for the things I'm doing. Whether it's an event or it's a book or an album. So, being intentional. I would also say if you're going to support an artist and community, I would say ask a lot of questions. Ask that artist what's going on. Talk to them about their work and their job, and actually ask questions the way you would ask about another person's job. Sort of treat them like a real person, like they've got a real job. So I like asking questions about what's up in their lives. Randy Borowski says, was it a conscientious decision to move from more of a rock pop artist to more of a folk rock artist? Yeah, yes and no. There's this really interesting moment. Great question, Randy. Thanks. And thanks, by the way, Randy, for being around long enough to know that transition, that sort of changed for me. Randy Borowski, by the way, South Carolina, really early friend and early supporter, booked me a few times in South Carolina, and I deeply appreciate Randy Borowski, and I'm glad you're here. So really early on when I signed with 5 Minute Walk, I had this conversation with the folks at the record label about the direction I wanted to go. And literally the way it was presented is like, are you thinking of yourself more like, who was the guy at the time? Was Dave Matthews? Or are you thinking of yourself more like Elliott Smith? And I listened to both those artists like a lot. But I like the feeling I had to choose. And so are you going to be more pop? Are you going to be more folk? and I got to sort of choose, and so I was like, well, try to do some pop stuff for a while, and I was really comfortable there, writing more pop-oriented stuff. But part of what I learned by trying to write pop music is that I'm not great at writing pop music, and so I gravitated somewhat naturally back towards more kind of folky, looser storytelling type music and elements. So in a sense, it was conscientious. Like at some point, I had to decide and commit to that. The gravitational pull was pretty natural, but I'd say probably about 2006, 2005, I started like conscientiously choosing to try to write better folk songs as opposed to trying to write pop songs that became like folk songs, if that makes some sense. So it was a little bit of both. Sean Wolf, what is your favorite Steve Miller Band tune? All of them. I to be honest, like I don't know Steve Miller Band well enough, and that might have cost me a friend just now. I don't know their music well enough to know like this is probably the one about the cowboy. Is that right? Is that Steve Miller Band, Space Cowboy? I think that's it. I don't know. But that one, if that's true, then that's what I like. Gail's question is, how does your faith impact your creativity? There are a couple interesting answers. I think interesting. We'll see if this is interesting. I find them interesting. To this, how does my faith impact my creativity? Madeline L'Engle writes about art and creativity. That art and creativity are like as an effort. It's an effort towards wholeness. The whole thing is a movement towards wholeness, and I buy that. That there's something in me that sort of is drawn towards my life becoming more whole, my world becoming more whole, and that drives my art. Part of how faith informs that is that the idea of wholeness is galvanized or authenticated, that human wholeness is a real thing. That my faith tradition teaches me that there is wholeness. That wholeness is a lofty but realistic and noble goal. And so that desire to make whole my own life or make whole the world around me by what I make, like my faith tradition kind of informs that and teaches me that not only is that real, but gives me a shape and discipline and spiritual practice to move in the direction of wholeness. And attached to that is, believing that, from my religious tradition, that all things in the world are being reconciled in the long run, that all things in some way, shape, or form will be made right. Believing that allows me to then pick the ball up when it hits the ground. So hey Buck, good to see you. When things don't go well. Actually, it's like this. There's a prayer in the prayer book that I did with Scott Erickson that says, may I learn to make good of what I'm given rather than just make sense of it. My faith tradition teaches me that my hope is in resurrection and renewal. So when things are sideways in my life, art and creativity are ways I can make good of the brokenness around me and do so intentionally because I believe in doing so. I'm participating in that long process of all things being made whole. So my faith informs those things, that I believe that wholeness and goodness are real and that can be pursued, but also when things are sideways and broken, that I get to participate in the renewal of things by creating work out of darkness and brokenness. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. I'm looking at this question from Sarah. Just remember this quote from you. I don't like country music, so I don't know why I keep writing country songs. It's 100% true. Sarah, share. It's a great memory. Yes, I don't like country music. I don't know why I keep writing country songs. I keep coming back. It's in there somewhere. Jennifer asks, what's the hardest part of the creative process? So I'd say a couple things. One, I think we're maybe already off the rails a little bit with the idea that there is, with the phrase, the creative process. So I actually don't buy the idea that there is a creative process. So even the phrase, the creative process, is off to me. What I think is that you have a creative process, I have a creative process, and there are commonalities, but the idea that there's like the creative process, I think gets us lost and gets us in trouble, because then we have really specific expectations about how it works for everybody. What I can speak to in terms of maybe some of the common obstacles, one of the harder parts of the creative process, I'm actually just in it right now, so this makes sense. One of the harder parts of the creative process that I'm in right now is the part of the creative process that asks me to do things that aren't creative. So there's this work I want to make. There's these two projects that I'm applying myself to right now, and I don't have enough space and time to give myself to them completely because I've got a bunch of stuff going on in my life so these incomplete things. There's household stuff. We're getting ready to have a baby girl, and by we I mean my wife. My wife is having a child. I'm responsible. If you have questions about that, WebMD is probably a great resource. But so I've got this life stuff going on that I'm jammed up on. Part of what a great artistic process will do, a creative process will do, is it'll point at stuff in my life that is incomplete. Like it points at unhealthy spaces in my life. If I'm not in a place psychologically, emotionally, financially to make art, part of what I get to pay attention to then is, thank you, Angela. Part of what I get to pay attention to then is that I have to attend to some of those things. So C.S. Lewis says it like this. He talks about sometimes when you're sitting down to pray and you're distracted and you're trying to get this idea out of your head, or this distraction out of your head, sometimes the better thing to do is actually get up and go take care of whatever that is that's bugging you, and then come back and pray. The creative process, for me, that's the hardest part, because there are times when I've got to put down a project to go attend to serious aspects of my life so that I can come back and give myself more fully to my artwork, if that makes some sense. That's kind of a harder part, where I can't balance everything at the same time, and my creative process is pointing at incomplete aspects of my life that I need to attend to. I think sometimes that's what a good process does, is it helps us to become healthier persons. Time wise, hey Joe, glad you're here. Thank you, Randy, appreciate it. So Jared asked, have you ever written a song or a chapter in something in a book that you then scrapped because of what the church community might think? Yeah, it's been a long time, but it's a story I tell that'll show up in this project that I'm releasing pretty soon. That when really early on, there's a song on the album Father. You might have, and the song is called At the Cross. And the whole idea is, Leo Smith, do you color your hair? No, I don't. The whole idea of the song is that there's so much commonality among people of faith that I find the divisiveness and the sort of the, I don't know, the ways we don't get along